It's me, your host. Welcome back to our channel. I hope you all are well and doing great. So today I'm back with another video to give a review on another book, which is Echoes of the Heart. A memoir of love, loss, and healing. This book is by Dr. Muhammad Naveed Akbar. So we have already I have already given reviews on the half chapter of the first one of this book. If you guys haven't watched it yet, you can visit our channel and watch it there. And if you guys wanted to buy any one of the best selling book, you can visit our Amazon page and buy it from there. So I'll be without any wastage of time, I'll start the next from where we have to continue. 1.10 The first glimpse of what's ahead. Something changed that afternoon, not huge but real. Aisha discovered a cafe hidden down the end of a quiet street. The windows misted with heat inside. She pushed open the door, attracted by the coffee, smell of coffee, and the murmur of talk. Inside the wood tables, mismatched chairs, and the gentle sound of a soft song on an old radio, all combined to create a warm atmosphere. It wasn't home, but it was not unfriendly either. The barista smiled, not like he recognized her, but like he might. That was sufficient. She asked for something plain, gesturing toward the menu so she wouldn't mess up and use the wrong words. The coffee came with a heart etched in foam, and the little dust opened her chest to a pang of unanticipated gratitude. She sat at a corner table and observed the city passing by through the window. She walked past people. She walked past people lost in their own narratives. For once, she didn't feel like an onlooker. She felt like part of the scenery, not the focus, but a stroke on the canvas. She took out her journal. She took out on her journal the one she hadn't used since she left. Her pen hovered over the empty page. What was there to say? She began with the sentence, "Today didn't feel impossible." It was unpoetic, but it was true. And the truth, she told herself, was the start of every good story. A child had waved at her from the outside of the cafe, his face smeared with chocolate, his mother smiling as she tugged him gently along. Aisha smiled too, waving back. It was the first genuine smile she had managed in days. She didn't know what lay ahead. She didn't know whether she would thrive or struggle or crumble. But she did know she had survived the most she had survived the most difficult part, starting. And in that instant, sipping coffee in an unfamiliar city with a journal open and a gentle melody play melody play and playing in the background, playing in the background, Aisha caught a glimpse of what could be coming. Not certainly, not perfection, but possibility. The first walk without a map. The morning sky was grey the next day when Aisha set out to walk with without looking at her phone for directions. Until today, each step she had ever taken had been intentional intentional, eyes fixed on the screen. On the screen, tracing lines on a map as if pursuing a visual lifeline. Today was different. Today she wanted to take a wrong turn on response purpose. Not out of fear, but because she was curious. Something in her shifted ever so slightly, a prodding voice that was said, trust your feet. Trust the city to meet you halfway. So she walked, no place to be, no time to get there, No time to get there, just the cadence of her feet against streets and resounding alleyways. With each block, she found things would have never seen. A bookstore with sun faded pages in the window. A park with old men set up chessboards under rustling trees. A wall covered with colorful paintings, that showed birds soaring out of open cages. There was something about that mural that stuck to her metaphor, too apt to be overlooked. So she lined there. So she so she lingered there, examining the lines, remembering her remembering her own wings, how tightly she had wrapped them around her. Was fear what held them shut, or had she merely lost the use of wings? Children steamed past her, laughing in a language still knotted in her ear, but she knew the laughter. I didn't require translation. She perched on a bench close by, allowing the hum of life to surround her. Surround her. She wasn't a part of it. She wasn't a part of it yet, but she was closer than she had been. She started to draw the mural book. In her book, retracing the birds with careful lines. It wasn't drawing, it was taking something, even if only on paper. As she walked further, she saw a street seller with bright colored scarves. Scarves. This man smiled and held out one for them. She tied it around her shoulders, not for warmth alone, but for symbolism. It was as if she had wrapped a cloak of courage over her fears. It was so odd how the smallest of exchanges could make the less threatening. A note, a smile, a trading of warmth without words. They were the building blocks of belonging. When she made it back to her apartment the night, she had nothing epic to telling job, no affinities, no meetings that changed the course of her life. But she had walked without a map. She had allowed the city to lead her, and as he avowed, and as he avowed reward, it had showed her small patches of wonder she wouldn't have discovered otherwise. That she thought was its own form of progress. Growth wasn't always thunderous, it was sometimes quite willingness to walk. She noted in her diary at night, "Today I didn't dread getting lost. I believed that I could find my way back." And that way, rest came more effortlessly than the previous nights. A language made of gestures. The hardest aspect of living in a foreign place was wasn't necessarily the words. It was that there was there was no shared meaning. Aisha had learned the language prior to relocating, memorizing words, rehearsing phrases with recordings and instructors. But actual conversation was a different creature altogether. Altogether, nonsense fell through the gaps. Sarcasm passed her by. The tone was misinterpreted, and when she got it wrong, she tended to feel as if she had tripped over her own self worth. One day she went into a bakery down the hall from her apartment building, determined to purchase something without restoring to gesture. There was a short line, but the stress seemed overwhelming. She practiced her sentence in her head. "One cheese pastry, please." But when it was her turn, she got the words confused. The woman at the counter looked up at her, then tentatively held out two possibilities. Aisha nodded to one of them, smiling smugly and hurriedly paid before ducking into the corner table, her cheeks burning. It was a minor error, but it felt like a failure reminder of how much farther she had to travel before she could blend in unobtrusively. With time, she began to see a new type of language. The one is constructed of smiles, nods, and hand signals. When words were not enough, her hands and eyes filled in for her. A shop owner taught her numbers using fingers, tapping coins on the counter to convey the meaning. A neighbor welcomed her every morning with a wave and thumbs up smiles. No words required. It was humanity reduced to it, a sense, connection without expectation, goodness without words. It was humanity reduced to its essence, connection without expectations, goodness without words. Carlos, the cafe guitarist, once taught her to sign courage in his hand with two fingers to his heart and then pointing up. She had no idea if it was a real sign or something he made up, but it lingered with her. She began to use it quietly, signing for herself in times of fear, reminding herself that courage isn't about speaking the language, it's about showing up in the spite of it. These silent interactions became her sanctuary. They made her realize that language, once stripped down to a sense, is not grammar. Its intention, attempt, reaching out when silence would be simpler. Each time someone answered patiently rather than irately, she felt more secure. Each miscommunication she surmounted wore down her fear. She started keeping a small notebook with not only new words but with sketches and catchphrases she learned along the way. A survival dictionary comes to life, and as the notebook grew fuller, so did she. She wasn't yet, she wasn't fluent yet, but she was learning to communicate in ways that counted. When the city begins to know you, it occurred quietly to begin with. Aisha would go. Aisha would go into the corner shop and the shopkeeper would salute before she had even reached the counter. The woman behind the counter at the cafe started recalling her order by rote without being asked. A small girl who lived in the building opposite began waving at her from her window every afternoon. There was no dramatic actions, but in a life that had been saturated with invisibility, they felt monumental. Awareness not merely being noticed, it was being remembered. Awareness, and in a city that had once felt like a horde of strangers, the slightest hint of familiarity was given great was given great gravity. It was as if city had begun to remember her edges, recognize her cadences, her own reflection in store windows no longer felt completely alive. Her movements now had a new confidence, not of mastery, but of movement repeated often enough to create grooves of belonging. On one evening, she overheard two women chatting in her building's stairwell and caught fragments of their conversation. It wasn't much, but she understood to know enough to know they were talking about someone's child starting school. She smiled, realizing she had gasped that without translation it was like hearing a secret she wasn't supposed to catch. And yet it made her feel included if even if no one else knew. She started visiting a tiny park that had a bench overlooking overlooking a fountain. The leaves rustled there with some sort of intimacy, and she herself found herself starting to recognize the regulars. The woman who walked for her dog every morning, the man who always read thick glasses with newspaper, the couple that fed birds at noon. Aisha never disturbed them, but her presence but her presence became permanent. But her presence became permanent. One afternoon, she the newspaper man nodded at her as he went by. She nodded in return, clinging to that brief, brief moment like a precious thing. Recognition, she knew, doesn't always result from grand introductions or profound conversation. Sometimes it arrives. Sometimes it arrives in the form of someone smiling at your back because they have seen your face enough to trust it. It arrives. It arrives from the street vendor asking, "Same again," or the mailman holding out your envelope before you have even spoken a word. A journal for the days that feel too long. Aisha's diary was her silent friend, the one where she could just talk about whatever language she was most comfortable with. Hers, she opened its pages every evening, no matter how tired she felt. It initially started as a means It initially started as a means of working through the confusion, the problems, the loneliness, but it turned out into something more, a documentation of her change, a chart of her emotional landscape. Landscape. One day, when all went wrong, one day when all went wrong, the journal heard her out without criticism. One day, when even a small triumph made her heart sink, it was a place to rejoin. The entries were all in varying health and mood. At times, they were letters to her mother she never wrote. At other times, they were poems written between sobs. Some of the pages were simply checklists of things she had been able to accomplish in one day. Ask for directions, smile at a stranger, smile at a stranger. Some of the pages were simply checklists of things she had been able to accomplish in one day. Ask for directions, smile at a stranger, prepare something edible. Small things, when they were put onto paper, started to have significance. They made her realize that progress wasn't made in leaps but was measured in steps, laboriously inscribed on each page. The journal also caught the doubts, the things she was too scared to put into words. Had she made the correct choice to arrive here? Was she squandering precious years? Would she never become genuinely at home? But even in her bleakest introspections, there was an undercurrent of truth that was a relief. To identify the fear was to make its grip less rigid. To set it down, to set it down was to seize it back. There was one evening after a difficult day. There was one evening after a difficult day at the cafe where she had heard an order wrong and spilled a drink in humiliation that she wrote a complete entry starting with I don't belong here. But by the end of the page, her hand smoothed out. She finished with, but maybe tomorrow I will. That was the magic of the journal. It let her feel everything without losing herself. She started reading from the old entries, amazed at how much she had developed. The girl, the girl who had been afraid to venture out was now exploring streets, was now exploring streets without a guide map. The woman who used to weep quietly at night. The woman who used to weep at night, quietly at night, now laughed with her co-workers. The diary didn't simply write about her life, it was about her evolution, and in so doing, it emboldened her to continue writing it. The flavor of memory in a foreign kitchen. The aroma of home is usually the most powerful connection, powerful connection to memory. And Aisha learned this lesson all over again when she tried cooking one of her recipe mother's recipes for the first time in her tiny kitchen. The room was not warm, The room was not warm, it contained a humming refrigerator, a solo coil stove, and that cabinet doors that groaned when opened. Aisha was not deterred. She spread out the ingredients she had specially bought at a store down at a store downtown. Cumin, turmeric, coriander, and dried chili flakes that filled her mind with home cooked stews, and her mother's frayed apron. Cooking was always someone else's talent in her household, her mother's primarily, sometimes her brother Omar's. But today she required the ceremony more than the food. While she peeled onions and minced garlic, her fingers trembled but she but muscle memory began to seep in slowly. She recalled how her mother always fried the spices, always fried the spices first to wake them up. The smell hit like a wave. For an instant, she was taken back to their little kitchen at home. At home, where the air always had a comforting smell where the radio played old melodies and someone or other grumbled about the heat. Her eyes her eyes brimmed over with tears, not so much for the onions, but for the unseen thread that had suddenly bound her back to all she had left behind. When the meal was finally complete, a humble lentil stew, it didn't quite taste like home. It was sweeter in flavor, gentle than her mother would have allowed, but it was hers, prepared in prepared in her apartment, on her stove, by her own hands. That gave it significance. She chewed slowly, savoring each morsel as if each bite were a dialogue with the past. It was not perfect, but it was connected. And at that moment, that was enough. The process of cooking became a second ritual after that. After that, she tried another dish every weekend. Some went terribly wrong: flatbreads that did not rise, sauces that curdled. But others started to resemble the flavors of home, even if just faintly. She started writing down every recipe in a notebook, making notes of changes, reminders, and small comments such as "put chili next time" or "made me cry this one." These dishes were her connection between two worlds, a conversation between the girl she once was and the woman she was evolving into. Later, she asked one of her fellow workers, Sophia, over for her dinner. It was the first time she had eaten with another person in her new residence. The night was spent in laughter, with the swapping of stories between bites, and with the feeling of warmth not generated by the stove. That evening, Aisha knew that home could be created one meal at a time, one memory at a time, in even the most foreign of environments. Conversation with the mirror. It wasn't until it wasn't until she was in her third month in the city that Aisha really stared at herself in the mirror. Not just a glance, as she brushed her hair. Not just a glance as she brushed her hair, or saw if she was dressed correctly, but stared, seeking meaning in the face that looked back. Her face hadn't altered dramatically, but something in her eyes had. Something in her eyes had. They were weighted, not the sorrowful heaviness, but the heavy weight of change. She saw in the mirror not the girl who had walked out of the house, She saw in the mirror not the girl who had walked out of the house, but the woman who had walked through unfamiliar streets with silent intent. She remained there for a long time, observing the way her lips fell naturally into a neural shape, the way her eyebrows drew together, the way her eyebrows drew together, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was deep in thought. So, this is all we have from this book, from this chapter. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, don't forget to press the like button. I'll be back with another videos with another books to give a review on, and I will complete this chapter in this next video. So till then, just take care and goodbye.